The Geneva International Trade Summit was collapsing before their eyes. 8 world leaders sat in stunned silence as their master translator suffered a stroke, leaving a $500 million climate technology deal hanging by a thread. CEO Mlev O'Connell watched helplessly as years of negotiations crumbled, knowing that thousands of jobs and entire nations' energy futures depended on this moment. Then, from the corner of the room, a quiet voice spoke in perfect Mandarin, followed by flawless Arabic, then German. "I can help translate." Everyone turned to see 11-year-old Ruby Conti, standing beside her father George Evans, the building's night security guard. What happened next shocked the diplomatic world and changed 3 lives forever. This is the incredible true story of how an unlikely young linguist prevented an international disaster, bridging language barriers and cultural divides to save a deal that would reshape global renewable energy. But fame came with a dangerous price that nearly destroyed everything they held dear. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Grand Conference Hall of the Geneva International Trade Center had never witnessed such chaos. In its 40-year history of hosting world leaders and diplomatic negotiations, the magnificent chamber, with its soaring ceilings adorned with flags from every nation on Earth, had been meticulously prepared for what many considered the most important climate technology summit of the century. 8 world leaders from different continents sat around the massive mahogany conference table that had cost more than most people earned in a lifetime. Each delegation represented not just their own nation's interests, but the hopes and economic futures of billions of people who desperately needed access to clean, affordable renewable energy technology. The atmosphere in the room was electric with anticipation and barely contained tension. Years of preliminary negotiations, cultural diplomacy, and economic planning had led to this crucial moment, where theoretical agreements would become binding international treaties worth hundreds of millions of dollars. At stake was a groundbreaking $500 million renewable energy partnership that would revolutionize how developing nations accessed solar panel technology, wind turbine systems, and battery storage solutions. The deal promised to create over 300,000 jobs across 3 continents, while providing clean electricity to remote communities that had never had reliable power sources. The Chinese delegation, led by Minister Zhang Wei, brought commitments for advanced solar manufacturing capabilities that could reduce production costs by 40%. The German representatives offered cutting-edge wind turbine technology that could generate electricity even in low wind conditions. The Brazilian consortium promised rare earth minerals essential for battery production, while the Kenyan delegation represented a coalition of African nations ready to provide installation sites and local workforce training programs. Each piece of this complex international puzzle was essential, and every detail had been negotiated with painstaking precision. Over 18 months of diplomatic discussions, technical consultations, and economic modeling that had consumed thousands of hours of expert analysis. Then disaster struck without warning, like lightning splitting a clear sky. Dr. Heinrich Müller, the summit's master translator and one of the most respected diplomatic linguists in the world, suddenly clutched his chest during a routine translation of technical specifications. His face went pale as he struggled to speak, then collapsed forward onto the translation booth's sophisticated equipment. The medical emergency team rushed into the conference hall within minutes, their urgent voices echoing through the stunned silence as they worked to stabilize Dr. Müller's condition. The 68-year-old linguist, who had served as translator for 12 different international summits and was fluent in 14 languages, was quickly transported to Geneva University Hospital with what appeared to be a serious stroke. The departure of the medical team left behind a conference hall filled with the kind of diplomatic crisis that could unravel months of careful preparation and international cooperation. Without Dr. Müller's expertise, the complex multilingual negotiations simply could not continue. The renewable energy contracts were filled with highly technical terminology that required precise translation to avoid catastrophic misunderstandings. Terms like photovoltaic efficiency ratings, grid integration protocols, and carbon offset verification systems had specific meanings in each language that could dramatically alter the legal and financial implications of the agreements. 1. Mistranslation could lead to disputes over implementation costs, technology transfer requirements, or environmental compliance standards that might take years to resolve. Through international arbitration, the stakes were simply too high to risk proceeding without expert linguistic guidance. CEO Maeve O'Connell, representing Eurogreen Energy Solutions and serving as the lead coordinator for the European Renewable Energy Consortium, felt her heart sink as she watched delegate after delegate begin gathering their documents and preparing to leave the conference hall. Her tailored Armani business suit, designed specifically for this historic summit, felt suddenly meaningless as everything she had worked toward for 5 years threatened to crumble before her eyes. The diamond-studded Cartier watch on her wrist, a gift celebrating her appointment as CEO, seemed to mock her helplessness as precious time slipped away with each passing minute. The Chinese delegation was already discussing rescheduling possibilities, but their manufacturing commitments had firm deadlines that couldn't accommodate significant delays. The German representatives faced similar constraints with their engineering teams and installation schedules. The Brazilian mineral extraction agreements had environmental compliance windows that couldn't be extended indefinitely. As Maeve watched the carefully orchestrated international cooperation dissolving into diplomatic disappointment and logistical complications, she understood that this wasn't just a business failure, it was a humanitarian catastrophe in the making. Without this renewable energy partnership, millions of people in developing nations would remain without access to clean electricity. Rural hospitals would continue operating on unreliable diesel generators. Schools would lack the power necessary for computer education. Small businesses would be unable to grow and create employment opportunities for their communities. The failure of this summit would set back global climate cooperation by years, potentially making it impossible to meet international carbon reduction targets that scientists had identified as critical for preventing catastrophic environmental changes. Standing in that magnificent conference hall, surrounded by the flags and symbols of international cooperation, Maeve O'Connell faced the crushing realization that sometimes even the most carefully planned diplomatic efforts could be derailed by circumstances completely beyond anyone's control. The silence in the room was deafening, broken only by the quiet conversations of delegates making arrangements for their departure and the distant sound of traffic from the streets of Geneva far below the conference center's windows. Then, cutting through the diplomatic chaos and multilingual confusion like a clear bell on a quiet morning, a young voice spoke with remarkable confidence and perfect pronunciation. "Excuse me, honorable delegates, I believe I can help with the translation services you need." Every head in the grand conference hall turned toward the source of this unexpected offer, creating a moment of absolute stillness that seemed to suspend time itself. What they saw defied every expectation and challenged every assumption about who could possibly possess the linguistic expertise necessary to save their international crisis. Standing near the back of the conference hall was 11-year-old Ruby Conti, her posture straight and respectful as she addressed some of the most powerful leaders in the world. Beside her stood her father, George Evans, wearing the navy blue uniform of the Geneva International Trade Center security staff. His expression calm and unsurprised by his daughter's remarkable intervention. Ruby was dressed simply in a clean white blouse and dark skirt that her father had carefully pressed that morning, her shoulder-length brown hair neatly braided and held with a simple elastic band. She carried a small leather notebook that had seen considerable use, its pages filled with handwritten notes in multiple languages and scripts that represented years of passionate linguistic study. While government officials in their expensive business suits and diplomats with their briefcases full of official documents stared in complete disbelief, only George Evans showed no surprise at his daughter's confident offer to assist with one of the most complex translation challenges in contemporary international relations. Ruby possessed an extraordinary gift that had mystified everyone who encountered her. Throughout her young life, while other people her age spent their evenings playing video games, watching television, or engaging with social media. Ruby would curl up in their small apartment with language podcasts streaming through her headphones, her fingers tracing character sets from different alphabets as she absorbed the rhythms and patterns of human communication from around the world. Her bedroom walls were covered not with posters of celebrities or fictional characters, but with maps showing the geographic distribution of different language families, charts displaying the evolution of alphabetic systems, and carefully hand-drawn diagrams illustrating the grammatical structures that made each language unique and beautiful in its own way. She had taught herself Mandarin Chinese by watching Beijing news broadcasts and practicing tonal pronunciation until she could distinguish between the subtle variations that changed meaning completely. Her Arabic had been perfected through conversations with refugee families in their Geneva neighborhood, learning not just the formal language taught in textbooks, but the cultural nuances and regional dialects that made communication truly effective. Her German accent was flawless because she had spent countless hours listening to classical music recordings with native-speaking commentators, absorbing not just vocabulary and grammar, but the cultural contexts that gave words their deeper meanings. She had mastered Portuguese through Brazilian television programs, French through conversation with Swiss neighbors, Italian by reading Renaissance poetry, and Russian by following international news broadcasts from Moscow. But Ruby's linguistic abilities went far beyond simple vocabulary memorization or grammatical rule learning. Her mind seemed to naturally understand the cultural contexts, diplomatic implications, and technical nuances that made international communication so complex and challenging. She could identify not just what people were saying, but what they meant beneath their words, understanding the subtle implications and cultural sensitivities that could make the difference between successful international cooperation and diplomatic disaster. When she heard the Chinese delegation discussing manufacturing timelines, she understood not just their technical requirements, but their cultural approach to business relationships and long-term planning. When the German representatives mentioned engineering specifications, she grasped both the technical details and the cultural importance of precision and reliability in German business culture. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Her remarkable gift wasn't just about translating words from one language to another. It was about building bridges between different ways of thinking, different cultural approaches to problem solving, and different worldviews that could either clash destructively or combine synergistically to create solutions that no single culture could develop alone. The delegates in the conference hall found themselves facing an unprecedented situation that challenged their assumptions about expertise, authority, and the sources of solutions to complex international problems. Here was a young person, dressed simply and carrying only a notebook, offering to solve a crisis that had brought their multi-million-dollar summit to a complete standstill. Minister Zhang Wei from the Chinese delegation exchanged glances with his colleagues, their faces reflecting a mixture of skepticism and curious interest. The German representatives whispered among themselves in rapid German, clearly debating whether this unexpected development could possibly lead to a legitimate solution. The Brazilian consortium members looked toward their lead negotiator, who seemed equally uncertain about how to respond to such an unusual offer of assistance. The African delegation, representing nations that had often been underestimated in international forums, showed more openness to the possibility that solutions might come from unexpected sources. As the seconds ticked by, the weight of their collective decision pressed down on everyone in the room. They could dismiss this young person's offer and accept the failure of their renewable energy partnership, or they could take a leap of faith that might either save their international cooperation or lead to an even more embarrassing diplomatic catastrophe. The future of clean energy access for millions of people, hundreds of thousands of potential jobs, and the credibility of international climate cooperation hung in the balance, waiting for someone to make a decision that would either open new possibilities or close them forever. George Evans had worked the graveyard security shift at the Geneva International Trade Center for 7 long years, walking empty corridors and monitoring surveillance systems, while the world's most powerful leaders slept peacefully in luxury hotels throughout the city. His job required him to arrive at 10 o'clock each evening and remain vigilant until 6 in the morning, protecting international diplomatic facilities and ensuring the safety of sensitive negotiations that shaped global politics and economics. After his beloved wife Elena died from pancreatic cancer when Ruby was only 6 years old, George had raised his daughter entirely alone in their modest 2-bedroom apartment in the working-class district of Carouge, just outside Geneva's expensive city center. The neighborhood was home to immigrants, working families, and people who served the wealthy international community but could never afford to live among them. Their apartment building was constructed in the 1970s with practical concrete walls and small windows that faced other similar buildings rather than the beautiful lake views that cost thousands of dollars per month in rent. The hallways smelled of cooking from a dozen different cultures, and the elevator worked intermittently, requiring residents to climb for flights of stairs when mechanical problems arose. George's security guard salary of 4,000 to 100 Swiss francs per month barely covered their rent of 1,800 francs, groceries that cost nearly 800 francs monthly in Switzerland's expensive economy, utilities, transportation, and Ruby's school supplies. After paying for basic necessities, there was little money left for extras like new clothes, entertainment, or the kinds of educational opportunities that wealthy families took for granted. But George Evans possessed something that money couldn't buy: an unwavering dedication to his daughter's happiness and development that transcended their financial limitations. He never let Ruby feel the weight of their economic struggles or believe that their modest circumstances limited her potential for learning and growth. Their small living room had been transformed into what George liked to call their global classroom, where every available surface was covered with maps, language learning materials, and cultural artifacts that George had collected from the international visitors he encountered during his security shifts. The coffee table was always stacked with newspapers in different languages that diplomats had left behind in the trade center's lobbies. The bookshelf was filled with language learning guides, cultural encyclopedias, and dictionaries that George had purchased secondhand or borrowed from the Geneva Public Library system. When Ruby had first shown interest in languages at age 7, asking her father about the different conversations she overheard when he occasionally brought her to work, George had recognized something special in her curiosity and determination. Rather than dismissing her interest as a temporary phase that she would outgrow, he had committed himself wholeheartedly to supporting her linguistic passion. He spent money they couldn't really afford on language learning software, purchasing discounted versions of programs that cost hundreds of francs but promised to unlock Ruby's potential for communication across cultures. He borrowed books from libraries in languages he couldn't even identify, trusting Ruby's ability to navigate linguistic territories that remained completely foreign to him. Every small milestone in Ruby's linguistic journey was celebrated as if she had conquered mountains. When she successfully held her first conversation in Arabic with their neighbor Mrs. Hassan, George had taken her out for ice cream despite their tight budget. When she helped translate a medical appointment for an elderly Italian woman in their building, George had beamed with pride for days. Their evening routine had developed into a comfortable ritual that both father and daughter treasured. George would return from his security shift, tired from 8 hours of walking empty corridors and monitoring surveillance equipment, to find Ruby at their small kitchen table, with homework spread before her in neat, organized piles, but alongside her regular schoolwork: mathematics, science, French literature, and history. There would always be additional materials that Ruby had chosen for herself: language learning exercises, cultural studies, and self-designed projects in whatever linguistic territory had captured her interest that particular week. She might be practicing Mandarin pronunciation by repeating phrases from online tutorials, carefully copying Arabic script into a notebook, with the concentration and precision of a medieval monk transcribing sacred texts, or working through Russian grammar exercises that challenged her understanding of case systems. and verbal aspects. George often wondered if Ruby's extraordinary gift for languages was somehow connected to her mother's memory and unfulfilled dreams. Elena had always talked about traveling the world, experiencing different cultures, and meeting people from every corner of the globe. Cancer had stolen those dreams before they could be realized, cutting short a life that had been filled with curiosity about the wider world beyond their Swiss neighborhood. Perhaps Ruby's linguistic abilities were a way of honoring her mother's unfulfilled wanderlust, of connecting with the diverse global community that Elena had always wanted to explore. The thought brought both comfort and sadness to George's heart. Comfort in knowing that Elena's spirit of curiosity lived on through their daughter, and sadness in recognizing how much his wife would have loved to witness Ruby's remarkable development. The modest apartment in Carouge had become a sanctuary of learning and affection, where financial limitations were transformed into creative opportunities. When they couldn't afford expensive language learning programs, Ruby learned through free online resources and library materials. When they couldn't travel to different countries, Ruby brought those countries to their living room through newspapers, podcasts, and conversations with their international neighbors. George's love for his daughter was evident in every sacrifice he made, and every hour he spent supporting her education. He worked night shifts so he could be available during Ruby's school hours if she needed help with homework or wanted to practice languages together. He chose their apartment building specifically because it housed families from many different countries, giving Ruby opportunities to hear and practice multiple languages in natural conversational settings. The depth of their father-daughter bond was built not on expensive gifts or luxury experiences, but on shared curiosity, mutual respect, and George's unwavering belief that Ruby's potential was unlimited, regardless of their economic circumstances. In their small apartment filled with secondhand furniture and borrowed books, they had created something that no amount of money could purchase: a family foundation of love, support, and genuine appreciation for learning and personal growth. Maeve O'Connell inhabited a completely different universe from the Evans family's modest Swiss apartment, a world where luxury wasn't just commonplace but expected, where international business deals were discussed over meals that cost more than most people earned in a week, and where success was measured not just in financial terms, but in the ability to influence global economic and environmental policies. As the CEO of Eurogreen Energy Solutions, and the sole heir to a renewable technology empire that her grandfather had built from a small wind turbine manufacturing company in rural Ireland, Maeve had been raised in an environment where billion-dollar international deals weren't extraordinary business events. They were simply the expected outcome of competent leadership and strategic planning. Her penthouse apartment occupied the entire top floor of Geneva's most prestigious residential building, offering panoramic views of Lake Geneva that stretched toward the French Alps in the distance. The floor-to-ceiling windows provided a commanding perspective of the city that never failed to remind visitors of the vast distance between her elevated world and the lives of ordinary working people far below. The apartment itself was a testament to accumulated wealth and refined taste that had been cultivated over 3 generations of successful business leadership. Original paintings by artists whose names appeared in art history textbooks hung on walls covered with silk wallpaper that had been specially designed by Italian craftsmen. Furniture pieces created by designers whose waiting lists stretched for years filled rooms that were larger than many people's entire homes. Every surface spoke of money, international connections, and the kind of cultural sophistication that came with unlimited resources and access to the finest expressions of human creativity from around the world. Rare objects collected from different continents by previous generations of O'Connells filled custom-built display cases, ancient Chinese ceramics, African sculptures, Native American textiles, and European antiques that represented not just aesthetic appreciation, but the family's long history of international business relationships. Her walk-in closet was larger than many apartments, filled with designer business suits tailored specifically for high-stakes international negotiations, evening gowns for diplomatic receptions, and casual clothing that cost more than most people's monthly salaries. Chanel blazers hung beside Hermes handbags like artwork in a museum, while Tiffany jewelry and Swiss luxury watches represented not extravagance, but simply the standard accessories of daily life in her rarefied social stratum, despite possessing the kind of natural beauty that turned heads at international conferences and drew photographers' attention at charity galas. Despite having access to educational and professional opportunities that most people could only dream of, Maeve carried within her heart deep emotional wounds that had been inflicted by the harsh realities of existing at the intersection of enormous wealth and international business competition. She had learned early that her inherited fortune made her a target for people who would befriend her, romance her, and marry her for reasons that had nothing to do with who she was as a human being. Trust had become a luxury she could no longer afford after experiencing multiple betrayals that had taught her to view every relationship through the lens of potential exploitation or competitive advantage. Her marriage to businessman Viktor Petrov had begun like a fairy tale that temporarily restored her faith in the possibility of authentic human connection. Viktor was handsome in the classic European manner, successful in his own right as the founder of a renewable energy technology company, and charming in the effortless way that comes naturally to people who have spent their lives getting what they want through personal magnetism and strategic relationship building. For 3 years, Maeve had believed she had found someone who loved her for herself rather than her family fortune, someone who saw past the O'Connell name and inherited wealth to appreciate the vulnerable, intelligent woman beneath the corporate executive exterior. Viktor seemed to understand her passion for environmental sustainability, her desire to use business success for positive global impact, and her need for a partner who could match her intellectual curiosity and professional ambition. The truth, when it finally emerged through overheard phone conversations and discovered financial documents, shattered something fundamental within Maeve's ability to trust other people's motivations. Viktor had pursued their relationship methodically and strategically, viewing their marriage as a business merger rather than a romantic partnership that could provide mutual support and genuine companionship. He had studied her preferences and personality like a corporate acquisition target, memorizing her favorite restaurants and cultural activities, learning to mimic the emotional responses she needed to feel loved and valued, and perfecting the art of seeming genuinely interested in her thoughts and dreams while actually calculating how to gain access to her family's proprietary renewable technology patents. Every kiss had been calculated for maximum emotional impact, every gesture of affection performed with the precision of an actor following a carefully written script designed to produce specific behavioral responses. Even their most intimate moments together had been manufactured for the purpose of gaining her trust and lowering her psychological defenses against business espionage and intellectual property theft. When Maeve discovered that Viktor had been systematically copying her family's wind turbine designs, solar panel efficiency innovations, and battery storage technologies to sell to competing companies, the betrayal cut deeper than simple business theft. He had violated not just her professional trust, but her most vulnerable emotional needs, exploiting her desire for authentic human connection to gain competitive advantages in international renewable energy markets. The realization that even her most private emotional experiences had been manipulated for profit left Maeve feeling hollow, used, and profoundly alone in ways that no amount of inherited wealth could heal or protect against. From that devastating discovery forward, she had constructed invisible but impenetrable walls around her heart, trusting only what could be measured in legal contracts and quarterly financial reports. She had learned to navigate the international business world with the same precision and emotional distance that her grandfather had taught her, finding safety only in professional relationships where expectations were clearly defined, legal obligations were enforceable, and emotional vulnerability remained carefully controlled within acceptable business parameters. But beneath her polished corporate exterior, behind the designer clothing and luxury accessories that provided armor against the world's capacity for inflicting emotional damage, lay a woman who had forgotten how to hope for authentic human connection, how to trust that someone might value her for reasons beyond her bank account. and how to believe in the possibility that genuine love and mutual respect could exist without hidden agendas or calculated exploitation. 2 weeks before the crucial Renewable Energy Summit that would determine the future of international climate cooperation, George Evans brought Ruby to work during the autumn school holidays when their usual babysitter, Mrs. Du Bois, had fallen ill with a persistent flu that left her unable to care for anyone beyond herself. George had faced the impossible choice between missing work and potentially losing his essential security guard position, or bringing Ruby to the Geneva International Trade Center and hoping that she could remain invisible and undisruptive during what promised to be an unusually busy evening of preparatory meetings and diplomatic consultations. Ruby had promised her father that she would be completely unobtrusive, settling herself in the small security office with her carefully packed backpack that contained everything necessary for several hours of quiet educational activity. She had brought her collection of international newspapers in 6 different languages, her worn leather notebook filled with linguistic observations and cultural notes, and her latest language learning project, a comparative study of diplomatic protocol expressions across different European and Asian business cultures. The Geneva International Trade Center's international environment fascinated Ruby on levels that she couldn't fully articulate, but felt deeply in her intellectual curiosity and emotional connection to cross-cultural communication. The building represented a crossroads where different worldviews, problem-solving approaches, and cultural values intersected to create solutions that no single nation could develop independently. She loved observing the subtle differences in how various diplomatic traditions approach the same challenges, the way Chinese negotiators emphasized long-term relationship, building over short-term contractual details, how German representatives valued precision and technical accuracy above diplomatic flexibility, and how African delegations brought collaborative decision-making styles that prioritized community consensus over individual authority. When Maeve O'Connell arrived that evening for crucial preliminary meetings with the Renewable Energy Summit coordinators, she was dressed in her signature navy Chanel blazer that had been tailored specifically for international business negotiations, paired with Italian leather shoes that added several inches to her already impressive height, and a Swiss luxury watch that served as both timepiece and symbol of punctuality's importance in diplomatic settings. Her leather briefcase, crafted by Hermes artisans and costing more than George Evans earned in 2 months, contained contract proposals, financial projections, and technical specifications that represented months of preparation by teams of engineers, economists, and legal experts from across Europe's renewable energy industry. Maeve's daily routine typically involved reviewing overnight reports from international markets, preparing for meetings with government representatives, and managing the countless technical and financial details that kept Eurogreen Energy Solutions operating smoothly across multiple time zones and regulatory environments. She prided herself on maintaining complete awareness of everything happening within her sphere of responsibility, which made the sight of an unauthorized young person in what should have been a secure diplomatic facility both surprising and immediately concerning. Professional international business environments operated according to strict protocols that separated official negotiations from personal circumstances, maintained security clearances that protected sensitive economic information, and enforced boundaries that prevented unauthorized individuals from accessing discussions that could influence global markets and international relations. "This is completely inappropriate," Maeve said, her voice carrying the unmistakable authority of someone who had never been required to question her own judgment or accommodate unexpected deviations from established procedures. International trade facilities have strict security protocols about unauthorized individuals. In sensitive diplomatic areas, George looked up from the bank of security monitors he had been systematically checking as part of his evening routine, his face immediately flushing with embarrassment and genuine anxiety about the possibility of losing his employment over circumstances that had been beyond his control. He had hoped to complete his security duties efficiently and quietly without drawing attention to Ruby's presence or creating complications. that might jeopardize his ability to provide for his daughter's needs. "I'm incredibly sorry, Ms. O'Connell," George replied, his voice tight with stress and sincere remorse. "Ruby has been homesick from school, and I didn't have anyone who could watch her tonight. I promise this situation won't happen again, and she'll stay completely out of everyone's way." Maev's initial reaction was to maintain her position firmly, to insist on the enforcement of security regulations that governed her perfectly controlled professional environment. She had learned through painful experience that making exceptions, showing flexibility, or allowing personal circumstances to override business protocols inevitably led to complications and compromised standards that could spiral beyond anyone's ability to control or predict. But then something unexpected happened that changed the trajectory of the entire evening and planted seeds of recognition that would fundamentally alter how Maev understood the relationship between formal expertise and genuine capability. A heated argument erupted between two junior diplomats near the conference room in Trance One, speaking rapid, frustrated French while the other responded in equally agitated German, over highly technical specifications in the preliminary renewable energy contracts that had been circulated for review before the main summit. The French representative, clearly stressed by the complexity of the technical documentation, was trying to explain concerns about photovoltaic efficiency ratings and their implications for long-term energy production guarantees. The German diplomat, equally frustrated by the communication barrier, was attempting to clarify engineering specifications related to wind turbine installation requirements and grid integration protocols. The language barrier was creating dangerous misunderstandings about crucial implementation details that could affect the entire renewable energy partnership. Technical terminology had specific meanings in each language that could dramatically alter legal obligations, financial responsibilities, and environmental compliance requirements. Without proper translation, their argument was escalating toward the kind of diplomatic incident that could poison relationships between their respective governments and undermine months of careful preparation for the international summit. Ruby quietly approached the heated discussion with the kind of respectful confidence that seemed impossible for someone her age, but reflected her deep understanding of diplomatic protocols and cultural sensitivities. Speaking first in perfect French, she addressed the French representative with proper formal courtesy. "Pardonnez-moi, monsieur. Je crois comprendre votre préoccupation concernant les specifications photovoltaics." Then, switching seamlessly to flawless German, she turned to the German diplomat and continued, "Und ich verstehe Aucher technischen Fragen über die Windturbinen integration." For the next several minutes, Ruby served as an impromptu translator and cultural mediator, helping both diplomats understand that they were actually in complete agreement about the core technical issues, but had been prevented from recognizing their alignment by linguistic and cultural differences in how they expressed identical concerns. She explained the French representative's concerns about energy production guarantees in terms that the German diplomat could understand within his engineering framework, while simultaneously translating the German technical specifications into language that addressed the French delegate's legal and regulatory concerns. Maev stood motionless near the conference room entrance, watching this extraordinary intervention unfold with growing amazement and something approaching professional awe. The young person was demonstrating not just remarkable linguistic abilities, but sophisticated understanding of complex technical concepts, diplomatic protocols, and cultural nuances that seemed impossible for someone her age to have acquired through any conventional educational process. Ruby's intervention had not only prevented a potentially damaging diplomatic incident, but had actually improved the preliminary negotiations by helping both representatives understand technical details more clearly than they had before. Their language barrier created confusion. As the two diplomats shook hands and returned to their respective preparations with obvious relief and renewed mutual respect, Maev found herself studying Ruby's face intently, searching for any signs of calculation, ambition, or awareness of the remarkable power she had just wielded in preventing diplomatic disaster. Instead, she saw only genuine pleasure in helping people communicate effectively across cultural boundaries. pure satisfaction in using her linguistic gifts to solve problems and facilitate understanding between individuals who shared common goals, but had been prevented from recognizing their alignment by barriers of language and cultural expression. The morning of the Geneva International Trade Summit arrived with unprecedented global attention and diplomatic pressure that transformed the normally quiet Swiss city into the epicenter of international renewable energy politics. News crews from CNN, BBC, Reuters, Al Jazeera, and dozens of other major media outlets had established their broadcasting positions outside the Geneva International Trade Center, creating a forest of satellite dishes and camera equipment that stretched for several city blocks. 8 world leaders and their extensive diplomatic entourages had traveled thousands of miles to participate in what environmental economists were calling the most important climate technology summit since the Paris Climate Accords. The renewable energy partnership being negotiated represented far more than a simple business transaction. It was a comprehensive framework for international cooperation that could fundamentally reshape how developing nations accessed clean technology and how wealthy countries fulfilled their environmental obligations to the global community. The stakes couldn't have been higher for any of the participating nations. China's delegation, led by the formidable Minister Zhang Wei, brought commitments for advanced solar panel manufacturing capabilities that could reduce production costs by 40% while maintaining the highest efficiency standards in the industry. Their willingness to share closely guarded technological innovations represented a dramatic shift in international economic policy that had taken 3 years of careful diplomatic preparation. Germany's Renewable Energy Consortium offered cutting-edge wind turbine technology that could generate electricity even in low wind conditions, potentially opening vast geographic areas for clean energy development that had previously been considered unsuitable for wind power generation. Their engineering breakthroughs represented decades of research and development investment that they were prepared to share through international partnerships. The Brazilian delegation represented a coalition of South American nations that controlled essential rare earth mineral deposits necessary for advanced battery storage systems. Their participation was crucial for creating the integrated renewable energy networks that would make clean electricity accessible to remote communities throughout the developing world. Kenya's representatives spoke for a broader African coalition that offered not just installation sites for renewable energy infrastructure, but comprehensive workforce training programs that would create hundreds of thousands of skilled jobs in communities that had historically been excluded from technological development opportunities. Each component of this complex international partnership was essential, and every technical detail had been negotiated with painstaking precision through 18 months of diplomatic discussions, economic modeling, and cultural consultation that had consumed thousands of hours of expert analysis and cross-cultural relationship building. When Dr. Heinrich Müller's sudden medical emergency left the summit without its master translator, the crisis threatened to unravel not just months of careful preparation, but years of trust building between nations that had historically viewed each other with suspicion and competitive hostility. The renewable energy contracts were filled with highly technical terminology that required absolute precision in translation to avoid catastrophic misunderstandings that could lead to years of international litigation. Terms like photovoltaic conversion efficiency protocols, grid synchronization integration systems, and carbon offset verification methodologies had specific legal and technical meanings in each language that could dramatically alter the financial obligations, environmental compliance requirements, and technology transfer arrangements that formed the foundation of their cooperation. A single mistranslation could create disputes over implementation costs that might escalate into trade wars, technology transfer disagreements that could poison diplomatic relationships for decades, or environmental compliance misunderstandings that could undermine global climate protection efforts at the most critical moment in human environmental history. Without Dr. Müller's expertise, the complex, multilingual negotiations simply could not continue. The risk of proceeding without expert linguistic guidance was too enormous to contemplate. given the potential consequences for international relations, environmental protection, and economic development across multiple continents. The tension in the Grand Conference Hall was almost physically palpable, as delegates from 8 different nations faced the devastating prospect of watching their historic cooperation dissolve into diplomatic disappointment and logistical complications that might take years to resolve. Ruby Conti stepped forward from her position near the back of the conference hall with a composure and confidence that seemed to defy every reasonable expectation about age, experience, and the sources of expertise in international diplomatic settings. Her simple white blouse and dark skirt, carefully pressed by her father that morning, stood in stark contrast to the expensive business suits and formal diplomatic attire that filled the room. Addressing the Chinese delegation first, Ruby spoke in fluent Mandarin with perfect tonal pronunciation and impeccable cultural formality. Her words, requesting permission to assist with translation services for the important international cooperation, demonstrated not just linguistic ability, but deep understanding of Chinese diplomatic protocol and cultural sensitivity. Minister Zhang Wei's eyebrows rose in obvious surprise, but his expression quickly shifted to respectful attention as he recognized the sophistication of Ruby's language skills and cultural awareness. He responded in Mandarin, testing her comprehension with a complex question about technical specifications, and Ruby answered with the kind of precision that indicated genuine understanding, rather than mere memorization. Turning to the German delegation, Ruby switched seamlessly to flawless German. Sehr geehrte Vertreter, ich möchte respektvoll die Erlaubnis bitten, bei den heutigen Verhandlungen als Dolmetscherin zu fungieren. Her request to serve as interpreter for the day's negotiations was delivered with perfect grammar and the formal register appropriate for addressing government officials. The German Energy Minister, Dr. Klaus Zimmermann, exchanged glances with his colleagues before responding with a technically complex question about wind turbine efficiency ratings. Ruby's answer demonstrated not just linguistic fluency, but sophisticated understanding of engineering principles that seemed impossible for someone her age to have acquired through conventional education. She continued around the room, addressing each delegation in their native language with appropriate cultural formality and technical precision. Her Arabic was flawless as she spoke to the Middle Eastern Energy Consortium. Her Portuguese impressed the Brazilian representatives, and her French delighted the African delegates, who had often struggled to receive adequate translation services in international forums. But Ruby's intervention went far beyond simple word-for-word translation between languages. She possessed an intuitive understanding of the cultural contexts, diplomatic implications, and technical nuances that could make the difference between successful international cooperation and devastating diplomatic failure. When the Chinese delegation raised concerns about intellectual property protection in their solar panel technology sharing agreements, Ruby didn't simply translate their words into other languages. She explained to the European representatives that Chinese business culture placed enormous emphasis on long-term relationship building and mutual respect, and that their concerns weren't about lack of trust, but about ensuring that their technological contributions would be honored and protected according to Chinese cultural values. Similarly, when the German engineers expressed frustration about implementation timelines that seemed unrealistic, Ruby helped the other delegations understand that German business culture prioritized precision and reliability above speed, and that their timeline concerns reflected their commitment to delivering technology that would function perfectly, rather than quickly. Her most remarkable intervention came when a particularly complex contract clause about carbon offset verification threatened to create a deadlock that could have destroyed the entire partnership. The Brazilian representatives understood the environmental requirements in terms of forest preservation and ecosystem protection, while the African delegates interpreted the same language as referring to community-based sustainability programs and local environmental management. Ruby recognized that both interpretations were correct within their respective cultural and geographic contexts. and she helped all parties understand that the apparent contradiction was actually an opportunity to create more comprehensive environmental protection than either approach could achieve. Independently, she suggested contract language that honored both the Brazilian emphasis on large-scale ecosystem preservation and the African focus on community-based environmental stewardship, creating a framework for carbon offset verification that was more robust and culturally sensitive than the original proposal. As Ruby facilitated these complex negotiations with the wisdom and diplomatic skill of someone far beyond her chronological age, she balanced competing interests and cultural expectations with the grace of a seasoned international mediator. She found solutions that satisfied all parties while maintaining the respect and dignity that were essential to successful cross-cultural partnerships. The renewable energy contracts that emerged from Ruby's translation and cultural mediation were more comprehensive, more equitable, and more likely to succeed than anyone had originally envisioned. Her intervention had not just saved the international partnership, it had elevated it to a level of cooperation that exceeded every participant's expectations. When the final contract details were resolved and the ceremonial signatures were exchanged with appropriate international protocol, the Grand Conference Hall erupted in applause that acknowledged not just the successful completion of their negotiations, but the extraordinary contribution of an unlikely young person who had bridged linguistic and cultural divides with remarkable skill and sensitivity. Maeve O'Connell found herself studying Ruby's face intently as the celebration continued around them, searching for any signs of calculation, ambition, or awareness of the enormous influence she had just wielded in saving this crucial international cooperation and potentially changing the course of global environmental policy. Instead, she saw only genuine pleasure in helping people from different cultures understand each other and work together toward common goals. Pure joy in using her remarkable linguistic gifts to solve complex problems and create bridges between worldviews that might otherwise have remained forever separate. The $500 million renewable energy partnership was not just secured, it had been transformed into something more ambitious and more likely to succeed than anyone had dared to hope. Ruby's cultural sensitivity and linguistic precision had helped create agreements that respected the values and priorities of all participating nations, while advancing their shared commitment to environmental protection and sustainable development. But as Maeve watched Ruby quietly gathering her simple notebook and preparing to return to her father's side, she realized that something far more valuable than a successful business deal had been revealed in this conference hall, a glimpse of what international cooperation could achieve when cultural barriers were bridged by genuine understanding, respect, and the kind of authentic goodness that seemed increasingly rare in a world dominated by competitive self-interest and nationalist suspicion. The historic Renewable Energy Summit concluded with unprecedented success that reverberated through international media and environmental policy circles around the world. Within hours of the ceremonial signing ceremony, news outlets from every continent were broadcasting reports about the groundbreaking $500 million partnership that would revolutionize clean energy access in developing nations while creating hundreds of thousands of jobs and establishing new frameworks for international environmental cooperation. The initial media coverage focused appropriately on the diplomatic achievement and its potential impact on global climate protection efforts. Environmental economists praised the innovative financing mechanisms that would make advanced renewable technology affordable for nations that had previously been unable to access clean energy infrastructure. International relations experts highlighted the precedent-setting cooperation between countries that had historically viewed each other as economic competitors rather than potential partners. But within the first 6 hours after the summit's conclusion, the media narrative began shifting in a direction that would have devastating consequences for Ruby County and her father, George Evans. The focus gradually moved away from the substantive policy achievements and international cooperation toward the extraordinary circumstances that had made the summit's success possible. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a junior diplomat from the Canadian trade delegation who had been deeply moved by witnessing Ruby's remarkable intervention, had used her smartphone to discreetly record portions of the translation session. Her intention had been entirely innocent. She wanted to preserve what she recognized as a historic moment of international cooperation and cross-cultural understanding that deserved to be remembered and celebrated. Late that evening, from her hotel room overlooking Lake Geneva, Dr. Mitchell uploaded a 3-minute video clip to her personal social media accounts with the caption, "11-year-old linguistic genius saves $500 million international climate deal. This is what hope looks like." Her post was accompanied by hashtags promoting environmental cooperation and international understanding, reflecting her genuine enthusiasm for the day's achievements. The video began spreading immediately across social media platforms with a velocity that Dr. Mitchell had never anticipated or intended. Within the first hour, it had been shared by environmental activists, language learning enthusiasts, and people who were simply amazed by Ruby's extraordinary abilities. By midnight Geneva time, the video had accumulated over 100,000 views and was being discussed on news programs across multiple time zones. The footage showed Ruby addressing different delegations in their native languages with remarkable fluency and cultural sensitivity, demonstrating linguistic abilities that seemed almost supernatural for someone her age. The contrast between her simple appearance and modest demeanor and the sophisticated diplomatic environment she was navigating created a compelling narrative that captured global imagination. By dawn the following morning, the video had gone viral in the truest sense of the term, accumulating over 2 million views and generating thousands of comments, shares, and reaction videos from around the world. Major news networks began featuring the story in their morning broadcasts, describing Ruby as a polyglot prodigy, a linguistic miracle, and the young person who saved international climate cooperation. CNN's international correspondent reported from outside the Geneva International Trade Center, describing Ruby's intervention as one of the most remarkable displays of linguistic ability and cultural sensitivity ever witnessed in international diplomacy. The BBC's Geneva bureau chief interviewed environmental policy experts who praised Ruby's contribution to advancing global climate protection efforts. But as the media attention intensified, the coverage began taking on disturbing dimensions that transformed celebration of international cooperation into invasive speculation about Ruby's personal life and family circumstances. Social media comments evolved from admiration for her abilities to inappropriate questions about her education, her father's background, and whether the entire situation had been orchestrated for publicity purposes. Language learning companies began reaching out through intermediaries, offering substantial endorsement deals and proposing to make Ruby the spokesperson for their educational products. Television talk show producers contacted the Geneva International Trade Center, requesting interviews and offering appearance fees that exceeded George Evans' annual salary. Documentary filmmakers pitched series concepts about Ruby's life, proposing to follow her development as a linguistic prodigy through her teenage years. The comments section beneath the viral video became a disturbing mixture of genuine admiration and inappropriate speculation that made George's protective instincts flare with increasing alarm. Some users praised Ruby's abilities and expressed hope that her example might inspire other young people to pursue language learning and cross-cultural understanding. But others made uncomfortable observations about exploiting young linguistic talents for business purposes, questioned whether Ruby's abilities were genuine or somehow manufactured for publicity, and speculated inappropriately about her family's financial motivations for allowing her to participate in such high-stakes international negotiations. Several comments crossed clearly inappropriate boundaries, suggesting that Ruby's parents were exploiting her abilities for financial gain, questioning whether her linguistic development had been achieved through healthy or potentially harmful intensive training methods, and making observations about her appearance and demeanor that were entirely unsuitable for public discussion of a young person. The most disturbing aspect of the viral phenomenon was how quickly Ruby's remarkable linguistic abilities and genuine Desire to help people communicate became secondary to sensationalized speculation about her personal life and family circumstances. The focus shifted from celebrating international cooperation and cultural understanding to treating Ruby as a curiosity, a spectacle, and potentially a commodity for various forms of commercial exploitation. International media outlets began investigating Ruby's background, sending reporters to the Carouge neighborhood where she and her father lived. Photographers with telephoto lenses stationed themselves outside their apartment building, hoping to capture images of Ruby going about her daily life that could fuel additional news coverage and social media content. The Geneva International Trade Center's main telephone lines became overwhelmed with calls from journalists, talent agents, educational consultants, and various individuals who claimed to represent opportunities that could properly develop Ruby's extraordinary potential through arrangements that would inevitably involve significant media exposure and commercial partnerships. George Evans discovered the extent of the viral phenomenon when he arrived home from his security shift at 6 o'clock that Thursday morning, exhausted from a night of managing increased security protocols at the Trade Center in response to the heightened international attention. He had planned to prepare breakfast for Ruby and help her with homework before getting some sleep, maintaining their normal routine despite the previous day's extraordinary events. Instead, he found 17 missed calls on his personal phone, 12 voicemail messages from various media representatives, and his building's concierge holding a stack of business cards from people who had attempted to visit their apartment during the night. When he checked his email account, he discovered dozens of messages from news outlets, talent agencies, language learning companies, and documentary producers. But it was seeing the viral video itself, with its millions of views and thousands of comments speculating about Ruby's life and their family's circumstances, that triggered George's immediate and intensely protective reaction. His daughter's privacy had been violated without her consent or understanding of the potential consequences. Her normal development and emotional well-being were being threatened by unwanted celebrity attention that could follow her for years. Their quiet family life, carefully constructed around Ruby's education and emotional security, had been suddenly thrust into an international spotlight that could destroy the careful balance George had worked so hard to maintain since Elena's death. The thought of his daughter being treated as a public spectacle or commercial opportunity filled him with a protective fury unlike anything he had experienced. Since the dark days of his wife's illness and death, Ruby herself seemed overwhelmed and confused by the sudden attention, unable to understand why her simple desire to help people communicate had generated such intense public interest and speculation about her personal life. She had acted from pure motives of wanting to help solve a problem, and now found herself at the center of a media phenomenon that felt completely disconnected from her actual intentions and values. The viral video phenomenon represented everything George had feared about exposing Ruby's abilities to public attention: the transformation of her genuine gifts into entertainment, the reduction of her authentic desire to help others into commodity for commercial exploitation, and the violation of their family's privacy by people who viewed Ruby's extraordinary abilities as public property, rather than personal talents that deserved protection and respect. As George read through the increasingly invasive comments and media requests, he realized that the success of the Renewable Energy Summit, which should have been celebrated as a triumph of international cooperation and environmental progress, had inadvertently created a threat to his daughter's well-being that required immediate and decisive protective action. The morning sun cast long shadows across Lake Geneva as George Evans made his way through the elegant lobby of the Eurogreen Energy Solutions headquarters, his work-worn security guard uniform standing in stark contrast to the marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and expensive artwork that decorated the building's reception area. His hands trembled slightly, not from nervousness about confronting someone far above his social station, but from barely controlled parental fury that had been building throughout the sleepless night as he witnessed his daughter's privacy being violated by strangers around the world. He had requested an emergency meeting with Moev O'Connell at 7 o'clock that morning, knowing that successful executives typically arrived early. To manage international business across multiple time zones, the receptionist, impeccably dressed and professionally polite, had seemed surprised that a security guard was requesting a personal meeting with the CEO. But George's quiet intensity and obvious emotional distress had convinced her to accommodate his unusual request. The elevator ride to the 32nd floor felt interminable as George mentally rehearsed the conversation that would determine whether Ruby could return to the normal, protected life he had carefully constructed for her, or whether their family would be forever changed by forces beyond their control. Through the elevator's glass walls, he could see the city of Geneva spreading out below, a reminder of the vast economic and social distance between his working-class existence and the rarefied world of international business leadership. Moev O'Connell's executive office occupied a corner of the building that provided panoramic views of Lake Geneva and the French Alps beyond, a testament to the kind of success and influence that George could barely comprehend but now needed to confront directly. The space was larger than his entire apartment, filled with original artwork that probably cost more than he would earn in several lifetimes, and furniture that represented the kind of luxury that existed in a completely different universe from his daily reality. Behind an antique mahogany desk that had belonged to 3 generations of successful business leaders, Moev sat reviewing overnight reports from renewable energy markets around the world, her attention focused on the complex international implications of the previous day's successful summit. She was dressed in her signature style-tailored Chanel business suit that emphasized her executive authority, paired with Swiss luxury accessories that served as both functional items and symbols of her position in the global economic hierarchy. When George was escorted into her office by an assistant who seemed uncertain about the appropriateness of this unusual meeting, Moev looked up from her financial reports with an expression that combined professional courtesy with obvious curiosity about why the Geneva International Trade Center security guard had requested an urgent personal meeting with her. "Mr. Evans," she said, gesturing toward one of the leather chairs positioned in front of her desk, "please sit down. I understand you wanted to discuss something important with me this morning." George remained standing, his posture rigid with protective determination and righteous anger that had been building since he discovered the extent of his daughter's unwanted fame. His security guard uniform, with its simple navy blue fabric and practical design, seemed to emphasize the enormous social and economic distance between them. But his moral authority as a father protecting his daughter's well-being gave him a confidence that transcended their different social positions. "This has to stop immediately," George said, his voice tight with barely controlled parental desperation and fury. "Ruby is not a publicity opportunity or a marketing tool for your business interests or anyone else's commercial purposes. She's an 11-year-old person who tried to help people communicate with each other, and now she's being treated like some kind of international spectacle or entertainment commodity." The words poured out of George with the intensity of emotions that had been building throughout the night as he witnessed his daughter's transformation from a normal young person into a global internet phenomenon. He had spent hours reading through social media comments that speculated inappropriately about Ruby's personal life, her education, and their family's financial circumstances, feeling increasingly helpless as strangers around the world discussed his daughter as if she were public property rather than a vulnerable person who deserved privacy and protection. "Media representatives have been calling our apartment all night," George continued, his voice rising with each word as months of protective instincts focused into this single confrontation. "Photographers are stationed outside our building trying to take pictures of Ruby going to school. Documentary producers want to film her daily life. Language learning companies are offering endorsement deals that would turn her genuine desire to help people into commercial advertising." Moev, who had been expecting a routine conversation about security protocols or perhaps a request for improved working conditions, found herself confronting a father's protective fury that cut through all the professional distance and social barriers that normally governed her interactions with employees from different economic backgrounds. She had spent years insulating herself from emotional vulnerability and personal attachment, learning to navigate business relationships with calculated precision and emotional detachment that protected her from the kind of betrayal and exploitation she had experienced with Viktor Petrov. But George's anguish and protective love for his daughter created a direct challenge to her carefully maintained professional boundaries. The viral video has over 3 million views now, George said, pulling out his phone to show Mev the disturbing comments that had been posted beneath the footage of Ruby's diplomatic intervention. People are speculating about her education, questioning whether her abilities are real, making inappropriate observations about her appearance and our family's motivations. This is exactly what I've spent years trying to protect her from. As George scrolled through the comments, reading aloud some of the more invasive speculation about Ruby's linguistic development and their family's circumstances, Mev felt her heart constrict with growing recognition of her own responsibility for what had happened to Ruby and their family. She realized with crushing clarity that as the CEO of Eurogreen Energy Solutions and the leader of the Renewable Energy Consortium, she should have anticipated this possibility and established clear, enforceable guidelines about privacy protection, media management, and the safeguarding of individuals who became involved in international business through unusual circumstances. Her failure to protect Ruby from media exploitation felt like a profound betrayal of the trust that had been placed in her when the young person stepped forward to help solve their diplomatic crisis. She had been so focused on the successful completion of the renewable energy partnership that she had failed to consider the personal consequences for the remarkable young person who had made that success possible. I take complete and total responsibility for this situation, Mev replied, her voice barely above a whisper as the weight of her negligence and lack of protective foresight pressed down on her shoulders like a physical burden. I should have protected Ruby immediately after her intervention. I should have seen this possibility coming and taken steps to prevent media exploitation. Before it could begin, the conversation that followed was unlike any professional interaction Mev had ever experienced. George's protective anger was entirely justified and completely understandable, but it cut deeply into her already wounded heart, reminding her of every previous time she had been disappointed by people who claimed to care about her welfare while actually pursuing their own interests. George's fierce dedication to his daughter's well-being challenged everything Mev had learned about human motivations and the relationship between personal and professional interests. Here was a father who was willing to confront someone far above his social station, potentially risking his employment and financial security, purely to protect his daughter's privacy and emotional well-being. Ruby trusted you enough to step forward and help with the summit, George said, his voice carrying the moral authority of someone who had devoted his life to protecting the most important person in his world. She acted from pure motives of wanting to help people understand each other, and now that trust has been violated by people who see her extraordinary abilities as entertainment or commercial opportunity rather than the genuine gifts of a young person who deserves respect and protection. The silence that followed George's words was filled with the weight of moral responsibility and the recognition of fundamental failures in judgment and protective instinct. Mev found herself confronting not just the immediate crisis of Ruby's unwanted fame, but deeper questions about her own values, priorities, and understanding of what truly mattered in human relationships. "What do you want me to do?" Mev asked finally, her executive authority and professional confidence temporarily replaced by genuine uncertainty about how to repair the damage that had been done to a family that had never sought public attention or commercial opportunity. "I want Ruby to be left alone completely," George replied with firm determination. "No more media interviews, no endorsement deals, no documentary proposals, no publicity opportunities of any kind. She's a young person who tried to help, not a commodity for commercial exploitation or public entertainment. Our family just wants to return to our normal, private life where Ruby can continue her education and develop her abilities without being treated like a spectacle." The conversation ended with George's unwavering insistence that his daughter's privacy and well-being take precedence over any business interests, publicity opportunities, or commercial considerations that might arise from her remarkable linguistic abilities. As he left Maev's luxurious office, closing the door behind him with barely controlled emotion, she was left alone with the crushing weight of her failure to protect someone who had generously used her extraordinary gifts to help others. For days after the confrontational meeting that had left both George Evans and Maeve O'Connell emotionally drained and fundamentally changed, the initial media frenzy surrounding Ruby's viral fame had begun to subside slightly, though the underlying threat to their family's privacy and normal life remained as dangerous as ever. George had taken several days of accumulated vacation time to stay home with Ruby, protecting her from the photographers who still occasionally lingered outside their apartment building, and the persistent phone calls from various commercial interests who viewed her linguistic abilities as untapped market potential. The legal team that Maeve had quietly hired to protect Ruby's privacy had succeeded in having the original viral video removed from several major social media platforms, citing international laws protecting minors from commercial exploitation without parental consent. However, the video had been downloaded and re-uploaded so many times that completely controlling its distribution had proven impossible, leaving Ruby's remarkable diplomatic intervention permanently embedded in the global internet consciousness. On Thursday evening, Maeve was returning from an important business dinner at Le Chatbot, one of Geneva's most exclusive restaurants, where she had been finalizing secondary partnerships with Nordic renewable energy companies that wanted to participate in the expanded international cooperation made possible by Ruby's successful summit intervention. The dinner had been a professional triumph, securing an additional $200 million in clean energy investments that would extend the project's reach into Scandinavian markets and Arctic renewable energy development. She was dressed in her signature style for high-stakes business negotiations, an elegant Prada business dress in midnight blue that emphasized her executive authority, paired with Italian leather shoes that had been handcrafted specifically for her by artisans in Milan, and carrying her Hermes briefcase that contained contracts worth more than most people would see in several lifetimes. Her diamond earrings, a gift from her grandmother celebrating her appointment as CEO, caught the streetlights as she walked through Geneva's affluent business district toward her penthouse apartment. The successful dinner should have filled Maeve with professional satisfaction and personal pride in her ability to build upon the renewable energy partnership that Ruby had helped save. Instead, she found herself feeling emotionally hollow despite her business accomplishments, struggling with a persistent sense of dissatisfaction and spiritual emptiness that no amount of financial success seemed capable of addressing or resolving. Her thoughts kept returning to George Evans' protective fury and the moral authority with which he had confronted her about Ruby's exploitation. His willingness to risk his employment and financial security to protect his daughter's well-being had challenged everything Maeve thought she understood about human motivations, professional relationships, and the intersection between personal values and economic interests. As she approached her apartment building's elegant entrance, with its polished marble facade and uniformed doormen who represented the kind of luxury service that money could purchase, Maeve encountered an unexpected scene that would fundamentally alter her understanding of Ruby Conti, her family's values, and her own spiritual and emotional priorities. Ruby sat cross-legged on the sidewalk beside the building's loading dock, completely absorbed in conversation with an elderly Somali woman, whose weathered hands trembled as she held a thick stack of official documents that clearly represented something of enormous importance to her future and well-being. The woman's clothing suggested economic hardship: a worn winter coat that had seen many seasons, sturdy practical shoes that prioritized durability over appearance, and a colorful headscarf that seemed to be one of her few possessions that reflected personal aesthetic choice rather than pure necessity. Ruby was patiently helping the woman navigate what appeared to be an incredibly complex immigration and asylum application process, switching effortlessly between Arabic, French, and Somali as she explained each section of the bureaucratic paperwork, with the kind of careful attention and genuine concern that seemed increasingly rare. In contemporary society's fast-paced, self-interested environment, Ruby was saying in fluent Arabic, pointing to a specific section of the documents, while ensuring that the woman understood every legal requirement before helping her formulate appropriate responses, then switching to French to clarify a particular bureaucratic term. Cela signifie l'histoire de votre famille, ou ils ont vécu, ce qu'ils ont fait pour gagner leur vie. The conversation flowed naturally between languages as Ruby helped translate not just words, but complex legal concepts, cultural expectations, and bureaucratic requirements that could literally determine whether this woman would be granted asylum and safety in Switzerland or potentially deported back to circumstances that might threaten her life and well-being. Moev paused behind one of the building's marble pillars, instinctively understanding that she was witnessing something private and significant that would be disrupted by her presence. From her concealed position, she could observe the interaction without interfering with its natural development or making Ruby feel self-conscious about being watched by someone whose approval or disapproval might influence her behavior. What struck Moev immediately was the complete absence of any performative element in Ruby's assistance. There were no cameras recording her compassionate intervention, no adults standing nearby to praise her linguistic abilities or cultural sensitivity, no social media audience to impress with her remarkable capabilities, and no external recognition or material benefit waiting at the conclusion of her help. This was Ruby's authentic character revealed in its purest form, her genuine desire to help another human being who was struggling to navigate systems and processes that seemed designed to exclude and confuse rather than welcome and assist. The young person who had saved a $500 million international renewable energy deal was now investing the same linguistic talents and cultural sensitivity in helping one elderly refugee complete paperwork that might mean the difference between safety and deportation. Ruby continued in Arabic, her voice carrying none of the impatience or condescension that adults often displayed when helping people who struggled with language barriers or bureaucratic complexity. Instead, her tone reflected genuine warmth, infinite patience, and the kind of emotional generosity that seemed to flow from her naturally without calculation or expectation of reward. Ruby spent nearly 20 minutes carefully reading through each section of the asylum application, explaining in multiple languages what information was required, why particular details were important for the woman's case, and how to present her experiences and qualifications in ways that would maximize her chances of receiving official protection and the right to remain in Switzerland safely. When the elderly woman struggled to understand technical legal terminology related to persecution documentation and witness testimony requirements, Ruby didn't simply translate the words from one language to another. She took time to explain the underlying concepts, helping the woman understand how Swiss immigration law approached asylum cases and what kinds of information would be most persuasive to officials who would review her application. Ruby explained in Arabic, then switched to Somali to ensure complete understanding. Muhimka and ad si fafasan. Yishuraksto sidad yugu katargashe wadankaga. She was helping the woman understand that detailed explanation of the dangers she had faced in her home country would be crucial for her asylum case's success. But Ruby's assistance went beyond mere translation and bureaucratic guidance. She demonstrated remarkable emotional intelligence and cultural sensitivity in recognizing that completing asylum paperwork represented far more than a simple administrative task for someone who had fled persecution and violence in search of safety and human dignity. Ruby said softly in Arabic, acknowledging that the process was incredibly difficult emotionally. Her reassurance that the paperwork would help the woman achieve safety in Switzerland was delivered with genuine empathy and understanding of the courage required to seek asylum in a foreign country. Standing behind the marble pillar in her expensive designer clothing, surrounded by the luxury fixtures and architectural details that represented accumulated wealth and social privilege, Maev felt a profound emotional transformation, beginning deep within her carefully guarded heart. She was witnessing pure compassion in action, the kind of selfless generosity that existed without regard for personal benefit, social recognition, or material reward. The contrast between her own lifestyle and Ruby's authentic goodness created a moment of spiritual reckoning that challenged everything Maev had learned to value and prioritize in her adult life. Here was a young person who possessed extraordinary linguistic abilities that could potentially generate enormous commercial value, choosing instead to use those gifts to help one vulnerable refugee navigate bureaucratic systems that could determine her survival and safety. Ruby's remarkable talents weren't the result of ambition, calculation, or any desire for personal advancement that Maev had initially suspected. Instead, they grew naturally from a profound desire to connect with and help people who were struggling to communicate across cultural, linguistic, and bureaucratic barriers that often seemed designed to exclude and isolate rather than welcome and include. As Maev continued watching this interaction with growing amazement and something approaching spiritual awe, she began to understand how completely and fundamentally she had misjudged Ruby, her family, and the motivations behind the young person's intervention. In the International Renewable Energy Summit, she had been viewing Ruby through the distorted lens of corporate strategy and competitive advantage, projecting her own experiences of betrayal and manipulation onto a family that operated from entirely different values and principles. Her cynicism and protective suspicion, developed through years of business relationships where everyone seemed to have hidden agendas and ulterior motives, had blinded her to the possibility that genuine goodness and authentic generosity could still exist in the world. The elderly Somali woman was crying now, not from frustration or despair, but from relief and gratitude as she realized that Ruby's patient assistance had helped her successfully complete the complex asylum application that represented her only hope for legal protection and the right to remain in Switzerland safely. Her tears reflected not just personal gratitude, but recognition that someone had cared enough to invest time and energy in helping her navigate systems that had seemed impossibly complex and intimidating. The woman said in Arabic, thanking Ruby with the kind of heartfelt gratitude that transcended language barriers. Her blessing, asking Allah to protect and bless Ruby, carried the weight of genuine spiritual appreciation for assistance that might literally have saved her life. Ruby responded with humble grace that reflected her father's values and her own authentic character. Her Arabic response, expressing happiness at being able to help, demonstrated the genuine joy she found in using her linguistic abilities to solve problems and create connections between people across cultural divides. As the woman gathered her completed paperwork and prepared to submit her asylum application with newfound confidence and hope, Ruby helped her understand the next steps in the process, provided information about legal aid organizations that could offer additional assistance, and even wrote down her own contact information in case further translation help became necessary. The entire interaction had lasted nearly 40 minutes, during which Ruby had invested her remarkable linguistic talents, cultural knowledge, and emotional energy purely for the purpose of helping another human being who desperately needed assistance. There had been no audience to impress, no commercial opportunity to pursue, no social media content to create, and no material benefit to gain from her generous investment of time and ability. Maev found herself trembling with emotional recognition as tears began flowing down her carefully applied makeup, carrying with them years of accumulated cynicism, protective suspicion, and spiritual emptiness that had characterized her adult life. Since Viktor Petrov's devastating betrayal, for the first time in years, she was witnessing authentic human goodness that asked for nothing in return and expected no recognition or reward for its expression. The realization of how profoundly she had misjudged Ruby and her family created a wave of shame and regret that threatened to overwhelm her emotional defenses entirely. She had been so focused on protecting herself from potential exploitation and manipulation that she had become incapable of recognizing genuine compassion and authentic generosity. When they appeared before her, Ruby's extraordinary linguistic abilities which Mev had initially viewed as potential commercial assets or calculated advantages in international business competition, were actually expressions of a young person's deep desire to build bridges between cultures, facilitate understanding between people who spoke different languages, and use her remarkable gifts to help solve problems that prevented human beings from connecting with each other across barriers of communication and cultural difference. Standing there in the Swiss evening air, surrounded by the material symbols of her professional success and inherited wealth, Mev felt a profound spiritual emptiness that no amount of money, business achievement, or luxury possessions had been able to fill. She realized with devastating clarity that she had spent years accumulating external markers of success, while losing touch with the internal values and authentic human connections that actually provided meaning, purpose, and genuine satisfaction in life. Ruby's selfless assistance to the elderly refugee represented everything that Mev had forgotten was possible in human relationships: generosity without calculation, assistance without expectation of return, and the kind of authentic goodness that existed purely for its own sake, rather than as a strategy for personal advancement or social recognition. As Ruby helped the woman carefully fold and organize her completed asylum documents, ensuring that everything was properly prepared for submission, Mev understood that she was witnessing not just remarkable linguistic ability, but extraordinary moral character that had been shaped by values completely different from those that governed her own professional and personal decisions. The young person who had prevented an international crisis and saved a $500 million renewable energy deal was the same person who would spend her evening helping one vulnerable refugee complete paperwork that might save her life, not because anyone was watching or recording, not because any reward was offered, but simply because helping others was fundamentally who Ruby was as a human being. The recognition of Ruby's authentic character created a corresponding recognition of Mev's own spiritual poverty and emotional isolation. Despite all her professional accomplishments and material wealth, she had lost the ability to connect authentically with other people, to recognize genuine goodness when it appeared, and to value the kinds of human relationships that actually provided meaning and fulfillment beyond external measures of success and achievement. The morning following Mev's profound emotional awakening, she stood before her enormous walk-in closet that contained thousands of dollars worth of designer, business attire, luxury accessories, and the external symbols of professional success that had defined her public identity. For over a decade, for the first time in her adult life, she deliberately bypassed every expensive item that represented her corporate authority and inherited wealth, searching instead for the simplest, most humble clothing she could find. Her hands settled on a plain white cotton shirt that she had purchased years earlier for a charity volunteer event, but had never worn again, and a pair of basic blue jeans that had been relegated to the back of her closet. Behind rows of tailored business suits and designer dresses, the clothes felt foreign against her skin, lacking the structured confidence and protective armor that expensive fashion had provided. Throughout her professional career, standing before her antique vanity mirror, Mev systematically removed every piece of jewelry that normally adorned her appearance: the diamond earrings that had belonged to her grandmother, the Swiss luxury watch that marked her appointment as CEO, the gold bracelets and platinum rings that represented years of business achievements and inherited family wealth. Her reflection looked surprisingly vulnerable and authentic without the expensive accessories that had served as barriers between her true self and the rest of the world. She kept only her grandmother's simple silver necklace, a modest piece that represented family love rather than financial value, carrying with it memories of afternoon tea sessions where her grandmother had shared stories about the importance of kindness, generosity, and using one's privileges to help others rather than simply accumulating more wealth for its own sake. The transformation felt both liberating and terrifying. Without her usual armor of expensive clothing and precious accessories, Mev felt exposed and uncertain, but also more genuine and authentic than she had been in years. For the first time since Viktor Petrov's betrayal had taught her to mistrust everyone's motivations, she was preparing to approach another human being without the protective barriers of wealth, status, and corporate authority. Her journey to the Geneva International Trade Center took her through parts of the city she normally avoided, past modest shops and working-class neighborhoods where people lived paycheck to paycheck while serving the wealthy international community that dominated Geneva's economy. The contrast between her usual limousine transportation and riding public buses, filled with ordinary working people, provided additional perspective on the vast social distance that separated her world from the lives of families like the Evans. The employee break room where she had arranged to meet George Evans was located in the building's basement level, adjacent to the security offices and maintenance facilities that supported the trade center's operations but remained invisible to the diplomats and business leaders who conducted their important negotiations in the luxurious conference rooms on the upper floors. The space was utilitarian and humble. Fluorescent lighting that cast harsh shadows, plastic chairs that had been discarded from various office renovations over the years, vending machines that provided basic snacks and beverages, and a microwave oven that served the building's working class staff who couldn't afford the expensive restaurants that catered to international business delegations. Maeve arrived carrying the simple sandwiches from a nearby delicatessen and a bottle of fresh juice for Ruby, having deliberately chosen modest refreshments that reflected her desire to approach the Evans family as an equal rather than a wealthy benefactor, offering charity from a position of economic superiority. When George entered the break room for his lunch break, still wearing his security guard uniform after completing his morning rounds of the building's diplomatic facilities, his expression reflected a mixture of surprise and cautious curiosity. He had expected another formal meeting in Maeve's luxurious executive office, possibly involving lawyers or corporate representatives who would attempt to manage the situation through legal agreements and financial settlements. Instead, he found a woman who looked completely different from the intimidating CEO, who had previously embodied the vast social and economic distance between their worlds, dressed simply and sitting on an uncomfortable plastic chair, without any attempt to maintain executive authority or social superiority. Maeve appeared approachable, genuine, and surprisingly vulnerable. "Mr. Evans," Maeve said quietly, her voice carrying none of its usual corporate confidence, and instead trembling slightly with nervous sincerity. "I think we need to talk about how I can make amends for what happened to Ruby, and more importantly, how I can honor her remarkable character and genuine desire to help others." George settled across from her at the small table, his protective instincts still alert, but his curiosity engaged by this unexpected transformation in someone he had previously viewed as representative of everything that threatened his daughters' well-being and their family's privacy. Maeve began by explaining that she had already taken comprehensive steps to protect Ruby's privacy and remove the viral video from as many platforms as possible, working with international legal experts who specialized in protecting minors from commercial exploitation and unwanted media attention. Her legal team had also established cease and desist protocols that would prevent educational companies, media organizations, and talent agencies from contacting Ruby or making commercial offers without explicit parental consent. But more importantly, Maeve continued, she wanted to create something meaningful that would honor Ruby's authentic character and provide her with appropriate opportunities to use her extraordinary linguistic abilities in ways that aligned with her genuine desire to help people communicate across cultural barriers without exposing her to commercial exploitation or inappropriate public attention. "I've been thinking about what I witnessed the other evening," Maeve said, her voice thick with emotion as she recalled seeing Ruby help the elderly Somali refugee complete her asylum paperwork. "Your daughter wasn't performing for anyone or seeking recognition. She was simply being kind to someone who needed help. That's who she really is. And any opportunity I create needs to honor that authentic generosity." George's expression softened as he recognized the sincerity in Maeve's voice and her genuine understanding of what made Ruby special. For the first time since the viral video had threatened their family's privacy, he sensed that someone with power and resources actually understood his daughter's true character, rather than viewing her as a commodity for commercial exploitation. "Maeve, outlined her proposal with careful attention to Ruby's age, George's parental concerns, and the family's need for privacy and normal development. She wanted to establish a small, private volunteer program that would connect Ruby with refugee families and recent immigrants who needed assistance with translation services, document completion, and cultural orientation, not as a publicity, opportunity, or business initiative, but as a genuine community service that would allow Ruby to use her gifts to help people while learning about different cultures and developing her linguistic abilities in meaningful ways. The program would be completely confidential, with strict privacy protections and no media involvement whatsoever. Ruby would work with families on a voluntary basis, helping them navigate Swiss bureaucracy, complete important paperwork, and understand cultural expectations that would help them integrate successfully into their new communities. The focus would be entirely on service rather than recognition, learning rather than performance, and building genuine relationships rather than creating content for public consumption. Ruby would be working directly with families who desperately need help communicating with government agencies, understanding legal documents, and learning how Swiss society functions. Mev explained. She would be using her remarkable abilities to solve real problems for real people, building bridges between cultures in exactly the way she did during the Renewable Energy Summit, but on a more personal, human scale. George listened intently as Mev described the safeguards she had designed to protect Ruby's privacy and ensure that her participation remained focused on learning and service rather than publicity or commercial benefit. The program would operate through established refugee assistance organizations that already had privacy protocols and experience working with vulnerable populations. Ruby's involvement would be completely anonymous, with no documentation or publicity that could expose her to unwanted attention. Most importantly, Mev continued, this would be Ruby's choice entirely. If she's not interested, or if she decides at any point that she wants to stop participating, that decision would be respected immediately without any pressure or expectations for continued involvement. As if summoned by the mention of her name, Ruby appeared in the break room entrance, having completed her school day and come to meet her father as was their regular routine. She was carrying her worn leather notebook and a backpack filled with homework assignments, language learning materials, and the cultural curiosity that had driven her intellectual development. Since early age, Ruby, George said gently, Ms. O'Connell has a proposition for you, but I want you to understand that you're completely free to say no if you're not interested, and there won't be any consequences or disappointment if you choose not to participate. Mev turned to address Ruby directly, speaking to her with the same respect and consideration she would offer to any adult whose opinion and preferences mattered deeply. She explained the volunteer program in terms that acknowledged Ruby's intelligence and maturity while respecting her age and her father's protective concerns. I would really like to help people, Ruby said softly after Mev had finished describing the opportunity, especially families who are trying to build new lives here, but are having trouble with language barriers and understanding how things work in Switzerland. In those simple words, George heard the unmistakable echo of his late wife Elena's generous spirit and her belief in using whatever abilities they possessed to help others whenever possible. Elena had always talked about the importance of building bridges between different communities and cultures, and Ruby's enthusiasm for the volunteer program seemed to honor that memory while providing her with appropriate opportunities to develop her remarkable gifts. The volunteer program began quietly and gradually, with Ruby serving as a young cultural liaison and translator for refugee families who were struggling to navigate Swiss bureaucracy, complete immigration paperwork, and understand the cultural expectations that would help them integrate successfully into their new communities. Rather than positioning herself as the wealthy CEO overseeing a corporate charity project, Mev participated as a genuine volunteer, learning alongside Ruby about the challenges faced by families who had left everything behind in search of safety and opportunity. Ruby approached each family she worked with as an opportunity to learn about different cultures, languages, and human experiences that broadened her understanding of the world beyond Geneva's international business community. Her enthusiasm for helping others was infectious, reminding both George and Mev of the simple pleasure that came from using their abilities to solve problems and build genuine connections across cultural and linguistic boundaries. Other employees from the Geneva International Trade Center began joining the program voluntarily, creating a growing community of people who wanted to contribute something meaningful. Beyond their regular job responsibilities, the program attracted social workers, retired diplomats, university students, and ordinary citizens who recognized the importance of helping refugees and immigrants feel welcome in their new communities. 6 months later, on a peaceful Sunday evening in early spring, when the last snow was melting from the Swiss Alps and Lake Geneva reflected the soft colors of sunset, Mev found herself being welcomed into George and Ruby's small apartment in Carouge for dinner, an invitation that represented a milestone none of them had explicitly acknowledged, but all deeply understood and treasured. She arrived wearing the same simple cotton dress she had chosen for their first humble meeting in the employee break room, carrying only a modest bottle of Swiss wine and a box of French pastries for Ruby, having deliberately left behind all the designer accessories and luxury items that had once defined her public image and protected her from emotional vulnerability. The apartment radiated warmth and authenticity that no amount of inherited wealth could purchase or replicate. Ruby's language learning materials filled makeshift bookshelves constructed from boards and concrete blocks. Her artwork from school decorated the refrigerator alongside photographs that documented the history of love, loss, and resilience that had shaped their family's journey together. Maps of different countries covered one wall, marked with pins, indicating places Ruby hoped to visit someday, languages she wanted to learn, and culture she was curious to understand more deeply. The three of them sat around the small kitchen table that served as the center of their family life, with Ruby positioned between her father and Mev like a bridge connecting to different worlds that had learned to appreciate and understand each other despite their vastly different backgrounds and life experiences. Ruby was working on her latest linguistic project, a comparative study of how different cultures expressed concepts of family, community, and belonging, occasionally asking both adults for their perspectives on pronunciation, cultural context, and the emotional nuances that made each language unique and beautiful in its own way. They laughed together as Ruby attempted to teach Mev basic phrases in Arabic, patiently correcting her pronunciation and celebrating her progress with the same generous encouragement she offered to every refugee family she worked with through their volunteer program. Mev found herself experiencing genuine joy in learning something new, struggling with unfamiliar sounds, and being taught by someone who viewed her mistakes as opportunities for improvement rather than failures to judge. Their conversation flowed naturally between discussions of Ruby's school projects, George's observations about international diplomacy from his security work, and Mev's growing understanding of how business success could be used to create positive social impact rather than simply accumulating more wealth for its own sake. They shared stories from their past and hopes for their future without fear of judgment or betrayal, creating the kind of authentic emotional intimacy that Mev had forgotten was possible in human relationships. For the first time in years, she felt completely accepted for who she was as a person rather than what she represented in terms of wealth, corporate authority, or inherited social status. George found his heart opening in ways he hadn't experienced since Elena's death, not because of loneliness, but because of genuine affection and recognition that he had found someone who could love both him and Ruby without reservation or hidden agenda. Mev's transformation from intimidating CEO to humble friend and genuine family member had demonstrated the kind of character growth and authentic change that created foundation for lasting relationships built on mutual respect and shared values. Ruby, with the intuitive understanding that young people often possess about adult relationships and emotional dynamics, recognized that she had gained a maternal figure who would love and support her unconditionally, while encouraging her linguistic dreams and cultural curiosity. Mev's presence in their lives provided not just emotional support, but practical opportunities to use her abilities in meaningful ways that honored her authentic desire to help others. As candlelight flickered across their faces during their simple dinner of homemade soup, fresh bread, and conversation that ranged from Ruby's latest translation challenges to George's observations about international relations to Mev's growing understanding of what constituted genuine success in life, the story found its quiet but deeply satisfying conclusion. Three people who had been incomplete, in different ways: a single father struggling to provide opportunities for his gifted daughter, a young person with extraordinary abilities searching for meaningful ways to use her gifts, and a wealthy woman who had lost the ability to trust in authentic human relationships had somehow found their way to wholeness. Together, they had created a family built not on shared genetics or legal obligations, but on genuine love, mutual respect, and shared commitment to using their individual abilities, whether linguistic, protective, or financial, to care for each other and their broader community through whatever challenges and joys the future might bring. In their modest apartment filled with secondhand furniture, borrowed books, and the irreplaceable warmth of authentic relationships, they had discovered something that no amount of money could purchase: the simple but profound satisfaction of belonging to people who valued love over luxury, authenticity over appearance, and genuine human connection over material achievement or social recognition. As the evening concluded and Mev prepared to return to her penthouse apartment, she realized that she had finally found what she had been searching for without knowing it: not professional recognition or business success, but the basic human need to be part of a family that accepted her completely and provided the emotional foundation necessary for genuine happiness and spiritual fulfillment. The Geneva International Trade Center continued hosting diplomatic meetings and international business negotiations, but now it also served as the headquarters for a quiet volunteer program that connected people across cultural and linguistic barriers, creating understanding and opportunity where barriers had previously existed. Ruby continued developing her remarkable linguistic abilities, but now they were grounded in service to others and genuine cultural exchange, rather than commercial exploitation or public performance. Their story had become a testament to the transformative power of authentic human connection, the importance of recognizing genuine goodness when it appears, and the possibility that people from vastly different backgrounds can create families based on shared values, mutual respect, and commitment to using their abilities to make the world more welcoming and understanding for everyone who seeks connection across the barriers that too often divide, rather than unite human communities. The morning sun streamed through the windows of the Geneva Community Integration Center, illuminating a scene that would have been impossible to imagine 3 years earlier. Ruby Conti, now 14 and fluent in 12 languages, sat at a round table surrounded by a Syrian family, patiently helping their teenage son practice French pronunciation for his upcoming university entrance exam. Across the room, George Evans, no longer a security guard, but the center's operations director, was reviewing applications from new volunteers who wanted to join their expanding program. What had begun as a small initiative to help refugee families had grown into Geneva's most successful community integration program, serving over 100 families annually and inspiring similar projects across Switzerland. Mev O'Connell entered, carrying a tray of tea and homemade cookies, her simple cotton dress and warm smile a far cry from the intimidating CEO she had once been. As the center's primary benefactor and hands-on volunteer coordinator, she had discovered that true wealth came not from accumulating assets, but from building relationships that enriched everyone involved. "How did Ahmed's practice session go?" Mev asked Ruby in Arabic, having become reasonably conversational herself through 3 years of dedicated study. Ruby replied with a grin, "He's ready for the exam. His family is so proud." The center had become more than a language learning facility. It was a place where cultures intersected, friendships formed across continents, and the barriers that typically divided communities dissolved through shared meals, celebrated holidays, and collaborative projects that benefited everyone involved. Ruby's extraordinary linguistic abilities had continued developing, but now they served a purpose: that aligned perfectly with her authentic character. She had turned down numerous media opportunities, commercial endorsements, and academic scholarships that would have exploited her gifts for publicity rather than service. Instead, she spent her afternoons at the center, her evenings studying with the same passionate curiosity that had always driven her learning, and her weekends exploring Geneva with Mev and George, the family she had gained through circumstances none of them could have anticipated. The viral video that had once threatened their privacy was now remembered as the catalyst that brought together three people who had been searching for belonging without realizing it. George had found professional fulfillment and romantic partnership with someone who loved both him and Ruby completely. Ruby had discovered meaningful ways to use her remarkable abilities while growing up in a family that provided both stability and opportunity. Mev had learned that the most valuable inheritance wasn't money or property, but the capacity to love and be loved authentically. On quiet Sunday evenings, they still gathered around the same small kitchen table in George and Ruby's apartment, now expanded to include Mev's apartment next door, with walls open to create the space their family needed. Their conversations flowed between languages as naturally as their affection flowed between hearts that had learned to trust again. Their story had become a testament to the possibility that people from any background could create families based on shared values rather than shared genetics, and that the most extraordinary gifts were often found in the most unexpected places, waiting to be recognized by those wise enough to look beyond surface appearances to the authentic goodness that existed in the human heart. The Geneva Community Integration Center continued growing, but its success was measured not in statistics or media coverage, but in the warm embraces between families who had found home in a foreign place, the confident voices of young people speaking new languages, and the quiet satisfaction of three people who had discovered that love, when freely given and gratefully received, could transform any circumstance into the foundation for joy, purpose, and belonging that lasted far beyond any individual achievement or recognition. In a world that often celebrated wealth, fame, and individual success, their story remained a gentle reminder that the most meaningful victories were won not in boardrooms or on stages, but in the simple moments when human beings chose to see, understand, and care for each other across whatever differences might have once seemed to divide them. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.